you're joining us today. This is my animation and visual effects class. Currently, I've got 29 students in this class. It's all, some of them are in Shreveport, some of them are in California, some in New York,
Okay.
Florida, so all over the country. And we're currently going through Nuke and just did a big a test with them yesterday. So they're pretty well versed in things, animation, visual effects. So yeah. So so I guess, so what would be the best way to introduce you? So like, because you got a very wide ranging repertoire of skill sets actually.
I can kind of do a nutshell version. So started off writing and drawing comic books, and then became a filmmaker, writer, director, editor, producer. And as I was trying to learn those skills, I taught myself visual effects in terms of some 3D and compositing. In effects, I started off doing as a 3D guy, and so I was doing CG stuff on Hercules and Xena, and some stuff for Disney visual effects, DFX, which is actually where I met Greg originally,
Yeah, that's right.
and then I transitioned fairly quickly to compositing more. I tended to be more drawn to it. I'm an After Effects guy. I've done work in Nuke, but I'm really an After Effects compositor, and but I so built up a small visual effects studio, sold that to a company called Film Roman, which is an animation company. We did The Simpsons and King of the Hill.
Right.
I was a VP there.
That's what's up.
Yeah.
And then I ended up going independent again and along the way, Film Roman was acquired by a company that was a telecom, but they had a lot of money and wanted to be in entertainment. And so they ended up producing and backing 7 of my feature films that I ended up writing and directing and producing. And then I went independent. That company was sold to Stars, which is a big media conglomerate,
Right.
and a network. And then independently, I took on all the Law and Order shows, visual effects, Rizzoli and Isles, some
Right.
Gilmore Girls, a bunch of TV. But we had done work on iRobot and Miss Congeniality and Daredevil and a bunch of different high profile things. Did a lot of stuff for New Line, mostly for their trailers. So we were the ones who would come in, and there are rules about movie trailers, like you could only have 3 drops of blood in a close-up.
Right.
So we would remove 5 and just
Right.
odd things like that. Like that. But developed a relationship with Photochem, a big lab here in town, and I was kind of their secret visual effects guy and group. And so we would do shows for them that they treated as visual effects by Photochem, but it was actually us. And then eventually
Okay.
they just handed that over to us, and they just took a percentage, but we were credited officially.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Did that for several years, and then they bought a visual effects house, and they assured me that this would not affect our relationship whatsoever. And I told them I give it 3 months, and it was about 3 months. And so then we went off looking for other stuff. Currently, we do a lot of stuff on $2 to $3 million, $2 to $5 million budget action films. So if you go to Redbox and you see a film with like Michael Rooker or John Malkovich or Bruce Willis, a lot of the times those are films that we're involved in.
It makes sense.
We'll do 1 to 300. John Travolta as well as in the current one we just finished. 1 to 300 shots, a lot of gunplay, explosions, smoke, fire, that kind of stuff, as well as the normal fixes. So we do things like reflections of crew, and there's some cables in a corner and that kind of stuff.
Set extension here and there when necessary. Yeah.
We did most of our set extensions. I did a lot of digital painting of set extensions on Rizzoli and Isles because we shot on the Paramount lot, and it was set in Boston. And so once I did one where I gave them the Boston Harbor, they were like, "We can do this? Oh, okay." And so then it became almost every episode I did a Boston skyline somewhere, and in that stuff. So
Makes sense. Oh.
yeah, but that's largely what we do. And then I still write comics, so I'm actually back creating comic books. I just wrote something for Frank Miller Presents, his company, and then I've got a relationship where I consult, and I'm writing for a group out of Indonesia, a new company called Visiate, and so I'm creating new titles for them. And we have an animation deal on the table from a company called Toons to adapt the first book I wrote into an animated series.
Now, when you say a book, do you mean like a graphic novel?
Comic book. So the distinction I make, because I'm old, is that a graphic novel, when I was coming up as a collector and a reader, was an original story in a trade paperback or square paperback form.
Gotcha.
So, but it had to be an original. If it was a collection of stories, that was called a trade paperback. And then a regular, 32-page floppy, which is what they're often called today, comic book, is just a comic book. So that's the distinction I make between a graphic novel and a comic book. So I wrote a comic book series. It will be collected into a trade paperback.
Got it.
I did actually write an original graphic novel last year for heavy metal. So, but it's not out yet. So
that's coming up sometime in the near future.
I'm waiting to hear. They just did a big reorganization of their company, and so I'm trying to figure out what's real and what's not. But I'm very proud of it. It's very, very heavy metal. Awesome. The recurring feedback I'm getting is this feels like the movie, man. And so that's
pretty good compliment, actually. Yeah, that's good.
That's what I was shooting for. So, but so yeah, that's the broad strokes. I know it's long-winded, but that's the gist of what I do. So,
look, the funny thing is, like, I think as people that have been in this industry for a while, whatever facet you're in, you like to talk about it. I mean, you don't actually get asked about it all that often, and so, like, I'm curious, like, where did you train, or how did you learn first your comic book work, and then obviously moving into the visual effects side?
Everything I did, I'm self-taught.
Self-taught. Awesome.
Yeah. Everything I've ever done. So yeah, I got married at 17.
Okay.
So I didn't have an opportunity to go to college. I actually looked into it when I was like 19, and I was already drawing professionally, and I was living in Kentucky at the time, and I met with a college there at Eastern University, and I think it probably would have been really good for me to have done it, but their figure drawing teacher pulled me aside towards the end of my tour of the place and said, just letting you know, you draw better than most of the guys here that are teaching. I don't know if you're going to get anything out of it except being forced to draw every day. And I said, I think being forced to draw every day would probably be a good thing. And he said, but it's a lot of money. Think about it. And stuff. Because I wasn't going to get any kind of, I might have gotten a Pell Grant or something, but it wasn't
sure
help. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. I'm self-taught as well. I mean, I have a journalism degree, so they do connect weirdly into the film industry, writing, shooting, and stuff like that, editing. But do you feel like, as a self-taught person, that you missed anything, or there's some things that you wish you had learned along the way or been classically trained in?
The biggest things for me is because I joke about the fact that I've done so many different things because I have a short attention span, which isn't really true, because obviously to composite, anybody that actually really composites anything knows that you have to be really hyper focused and pay attention for an extended period of time. But it's somewhat true. So I mean, I think I would have to say that if I had gone and studied to be a better illustrator, that I would have been, I'm going to say this and it sounds egotistical. I was a really, really talented 17-year-old kid. And that's why I started getting work at 17. But that said, I'm not a hell of a lot better now at 57 than I was at drawing, because I didn't stay drawing. I ended up, I did storyboards for movies. That's actually what I was doing for Disney Visual Effects. Now that I think of it, I was storyboarding pilots and stuff for those guys. but ended up storyboarding The 13th Warrior came out of that, which was very cool. The Antonio Banderas movie.
Right.
But at any rate, so that's what I don't say I regret it, but I do think, where could my drawing have gone if I had drawn every day for the last 40 years, as opposed to drawing on demand when somebody wants to pay me something.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
Because in comics, I'm known as a writer. In film, I'm known as a visual effects guy and a director.
Mhm.
But I edit, and I'm also I produce a lot. I do a lot of like helping young filmmakers get their stuff done, not necessarily in terms of raising money for them, but in terms of letting them understand the whole process, because I did post-production supervision on several films, and
Right.
a lot of people just don't know that, well, you're going to have to do this and protect yourself and have this kind of insurance and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Do you have a favorite project that you've worked on? I mean, it's like, your career is slightly longer than mine at this point, but like, do you have one?
yeah, it's funny because I even though I did my overview there, I left out the fact that I'm most known for creating Bloodshot, the character that Vin Diesel played in the Sony movie. So I'm most proud of that character's longevity, of that IP.
Absolutely.
You will. The fact that, I did that stuff when I was 20. I started it when I was 26, so
Wow.
31 years ago, and I wrote 200 comics or so in 3.5 years, and so, which was a lot. And while I was the executive editor of the company of Valiant Comics, and then when we moved to California, I still continued to write. And my wife and kids and I were in New York. We were technically living in New Jersey, working in New York, and but when we moved to California, I continued to write comics, but I was teaching myself film and visual effects, and put together 10 grand and shot a short film that was full of visual effects that I had no idea how to do. And I had no idea how to do any of it. I mean, I'll tell you, I think it's funny. During the first day of filming my short, my little fantasy adventure short, I realized I'm composing with way too much headroom. It's like, I don't know why I'm doing this. And then it dawned on me that I was leaving room for the word balloons.
You were leaving room for the word balloons.
I was composing with the idea that people had speech bubbles.
That's hilarious.
And because that's how I compose a drawing.
Of course.
And it literally was like 3 or 4 hours into the first day. I'm like, it's way too much headroom. Why am I doing this? And of course, back then, this was 5 years before HD really kicked in. So right. It was 4:3 a square image anyway. I think if I had been composing for a 16:9 image, more landscape image, I probably would have caught it quicker. But the fact that I already had kind of a square image. So.
But that's that's how you learn, though, right? I mean, it's like you got the only way you're going to really figure this stuff out is by doing it. It's not you're not going to read about it in a book. I mean, you can, but it's not. It's until you actually just dive in and start working, then you start realizing, oh, that's how this thing really works.
That was the best film school I could have asked for, because I went from soup to nuts. We shot on 16 millimeter. And we had to go to a lab and have it transferred to video, which process we called telecine, which pretty much does not exist anymore.
Exactly.
And it was 16 millimeter, which means that it's a type of film strip that doesn't have holes on both sides of the film strip, and so there was what was called gate weave.
We've talked about that in class. Yeah, exactly.
So if you try to do visual effects on something with gate weave, it's really hard, because you're even on a locked off shot.
It's floating all over the place.
Yeah. And and I'm like, why is this doing it? We put the camera on a tripod, we walked away, we put sandbags on it. And then and it's 16, so the grain is big.
Yep.
So trying to stabilize it was very difficult, because everything wanted to grab the grain. But this is in 1996. So
yeah.
trying, as far as stabilizing tools, I had After Effects and that was it. I didn't know anything else to stabilize.
And it was a pretty rudimentary After Effects at that point.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Oh, I think we were on 3. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but yeah, it was. I used the first After Effects after it was bought by Adobe, so I did not use it when it was owned by a company called Cosa. But I know people who did, and
Yeah.
other effects guys that I'm around. But yeah, it was challenging, and we didn't have 3D tracking until 2000 or so, or I
Right.
wasn't until 99 or 2000 when Bushu came out, and it was 10 grand.
Yeah, exactly.
And so yeah, a lot of the tools have changed dramatically. The fact that Nuke has wonderful tracking tools, but Mocha is a lifesaver for us within After Effects that we use, and
Absolutely.
Pro version as well.
So I'm gonna open it up to my class too. I'm sure they've got questions they want to ask, but I'm gonna ask you one more before. So what advice do you think you would give somebody who's trying to get into the industry? I mean, that's obviously for a lot of my students, that is a goal. So what character traits do you see as being important? What advice would you have if they're trying to break in?
Well, in general, I'll go very general first, but professionalism and kindness and social skills help a lot and go a long way. If you set up an appointment to meet with somebody, don't be late. If they say, "Hey, I like this, but can you show me something where you're doing a fluid sim, if that's the kind of thing you do, or can you show me some stuff where you're compositing on, a more tricky environment where there's lots of whip pans or something." Don't wait a month before you start the test and get it back to them. If they showed interest, put the effort and the time in to try to get it back to them in a reasonable amount of time, a quick amount of time, not so fast that you feel you're not able to do your best work. But that applies to comics and everything I do, because I can't tell you how many times I've had a young artist show me comic book stuff and say, "Yeah, it's not my best stuff, man, but I didn't have a whole lot of time." And I'm like, "Don't show me your not best stuff." It's because I have no way of judging what you're capable of, and I haven't seen you in 6 months, so I don't know when you say you don't have a lot of time. We all have lives and families and commitments and stuff, but if you really want to do it, you have to do those things. So that's the general broad stroke work ethic part of it. But as far as doing a visual effects stuff, ideally you can get some real footage from something that's been shot professionally and do tests on it. If secondarily to that, I think the biggest thing you could do is, and I'm going to interrupt myself. I know that Shreveport has a great film festival down there. That's team up with some young or old filmmakers that and say, okay, I'm gonna put an additional skyline into this background and see what I can do, or I'm going to they've got a couple of car shots where you can see the reflections of the crew. I'm going to paint that out and show that I can do that. But create a demo reel is the long and the short of what I'm saying. I think that goes a long way. When we started getting work, I have a buddy that worked with me initially, and he still does, named Chad Cole. And Chad and I got into the business together. He was my employee doing graphic design and stuff for the comic side and trading cards and stuff like that. But I knew immediately that I wanted to go into visual effects and make films and be able to have my own company to be there as a resource for my movies. That was the whole point of me learning visual effects.
That makes sense.
It ended up being a bit of the tail wagging the dog sometimes, but it was the idea was that it was supposed to be a resource for me as a filmmaker. And Chad was just a very talented guy. He had never done anything like this, but he had an interest in it. And then today he's one of the best 3D guys you could ever find. He's just really, really good. And his work has been on the Lightwave 3D box 15, 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
All kinds of stuff. But he and I essentially put together a demo reel that was mostly from my 2 short films. Okay. One was a true short film. The other one was a trailer that I had shot with the idea of using this as a sales tool to raise money to make my first movie, and we did. And so my first movie was based on one of my comic books. It was a vampire movie called Frost, and we did a 16 millimeter trailer, and then I put the money together and shot enough to shoot part of it. And I shot a 35 millimeter film, and then it took me 5 years, but I finished my film and it did well. And that opened the doors for me to do other movies. But the idea that I had shots on my reel and Chad's reel that we could go in, and we were fortunate enough, and this is another thing that's kind of goes in the professionalism category, go to events like SIGGRAPH or if there's a CG event of whatever kind, and don't be afraid to walk up and introduce yourself to somebody. So I was at a New Tech Expo, October 10th, 1996, and there was a guy there wearing a Star Trek jacket. And I was asking questions of a guy named Dan Ablin, who was a 3D guy who wrote books and stuff. And it was knew his stuff pretty well in Lightwave. And I said, so what are you using for tracking? And he said, well, tracking really doesn't come up much in visual effects. We do. And I'm sitting there going, I was like, yes, it does.
It does too.
and I'm trying to figure out, he was saying, this is the cheat I use, and this is how I fake it. And I turn the image into a still, and I'm like, I can't turn a director of photography's footage into a still and do this. I mean, it's without everybody being on board that's how we're going to cheat this thing. And he just kind of blew off my question. And then this guy with the Star Trek jacket stood up and said, actually, it's a valid question. I'm the visual effects supervisor for Deep Space Nine, and we track in every episode. So, and there was no real answer, but I went over and thanked him for kind of backing me up and
validating what you were saying, right?
Yeah. And we became friends. And then a year later, when I decided to move up to LA, we were in San Diego at the time. He was kind enough to take us around to Digital Muse and some of the other visual effects houses at the time that were doing stuff for Star Trek. And we met with, we got to go watch the very last motion control model stuff being shot at Image G for Deep Space Nine. And he had won an Emmy for Star Trek Next Generation and stuff. And he really knew his stuff. He'd been around forever, and he's just one of the sweetest guys in the world. But he was kind enough to take us around, and Digital Muse, while we didn't get work from them, they really were impressed by our reel, because I'd had a shot in it where this sounds so silly today because I do this every day now,
right?
But we had muzzle flashes. And he said, I've never seen digital muzzle flashes. That makes a lot of sense. And because again, we're talking about 1997, and of course today, that's common. And the way we had done our digital muzzle flashes, I had digitized a VHS tape of The Rock with Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage, and I rotoscoped out the muzzle flashes from it.
Did you really? Okay.
and saved them, and that was my library of muzzle flashes. But and of course today there's libraries you can buy, and you can generate stuff, and there's software that will create them and all that kind of stuff. But it was just such a funny thing. But that opened doors to us, and even with people who didn't give us work, they knew who we were, and they would recommend us to somebody. And that same day, the next day of this New Tech event, we met, and I have a mental blank on his name, but the guy who ran DFX, Gary.
I know exactly who you're talking about. I can't think of his name either.
But we met him, and we met Al Lopez and John Bavaresco, who were at Encore. Within 3 months, we worked for all of these people. And so we did Honey, I Shrunk the Kids TV show for John and Al. We did a bunch of stuff for those pilots for Disney Effects, and both 3D stuff. It was so funny because it's a different era. I lived in an apartment 2 blocks from the Disney Channel buildings, and I had a desk in our spare bedroom, and I this guy, I'm going to call him Gary because I can't remember his name, but I think it was Gary, introduced me to some producer at Disney Channel that needed the animated opening for a Disney's Mulan sing-along video for VHS. And I'm like, we could do that. I have no idea what it is, but we can do it. And it turned out that they wanted a Chinese fan opening up, all digital and little pictures, and they run the credits and close and do it again, and next name. And so I built it in Lightwave. Chad and I textured it and rigged it and animated it. But the reason I bring all that up, it was so funny because the guy from Disney Channel was like, it's like, can I come by your office? I said, you're more than welcome, but my office is a desk in my guest bedroom.
Yeah.
Where are you? I said, I'm like 2 blocks from you. So I'll be there in, like after lunch. And I said,
Right.
well, come to lunch if you want. No, I couldn't do that to you. It's like, well, I'm going to grill some burgers. It's like, all right. So he came over and we did that. And he signed off on the stuff there. And that was it. So just kind of a different world in a lot of ways.
You said something that I thought was really interesting. You know, how important do you think it is, like when you're doing this work, to just be able to say yes? Like, can you do this? Yeah, sure. Whether or not you know that you can do it or not.
Most of my of my early career and everything I did was me saying yes and then figuring out how to do it. Now the thing is if you say yes and it's something that you really don't think you can figure out how to do it, that's wrong, because
yeah, exactly,
waste somebody's time. But if you're like, I'm sure we can figure this out in a reasonable amount of time. But I'll tell you this, here's an example of something. So a long time ago, as everything on my stories, there was a TV series called Max Steel 23 years ago. So Netter Digital was a company that was doing all the CG stuff for the series for Sony. And they got in trouble because they hired a bunch of people that were young people who didn't necessarily know what they were doing. So they didn't have enough strong leads to be able to keep everything moving. Right. And so they hired my company initially to build sets and environments. And you know Bill Arance as well, right?
Absolutely. And Bill spoke to our class, actually.
Okay, awesome. So yeah. Bill worked for me for a long time. So
okay.
Off and on over the years. So he came in and he was one of my CG guys, and he built giant jets and warehouses and landing strips and all the stuff he loves to do. And he did a beautiful job on it. And that's what we did initially for Netter. And then they were complaining about the lighting on the show. And I said, in all honesty, I could relight the show. It's just, you're averaging, I think they're averaging 600 shots or 500 shots a show. I said, it's not something I can do in a day. Right. We could probably relight that in a week or something with 2 or 3 of us. And they dallied around and didn't get me anything until Christmas week. But that was one of the only times I didn't go away for Christmas with my family. And so another buddy of mine, I just sat there and we relit their show in a week, and that went great. And we did a whole bunch of stuff for them. But Netter, I won't tell the whole long drawn out story, but basically they went bankrupt and they owed me a bunch of money. And they paid part of it, which was the right thing to do. But the guys who I was actually working with, their executives, really thought highly of us. And so 6-8 months later, they were working now at another company, and they called us up and said, we're doing this thing called Noddy, Noddy. It's a children's story, popular in England. We're doing an animated series. It's being animated in China, in Maya, but we need to do books. And I know you've got a print background and children's books. So we need high resolution print imagery. And this is long before you could do things like gigapixel and blow something up, from a video image. And you got to remember, video back then was like 640 by 40.
Very small.
Yeah, it's postage stamp. And so they're doing it in Maya. My studio was a Lightwave 3D house. And I said, love to help you, but we don't know Maya. We don't know Maya at all. We don't know anything about it. And it's like, well, we'd be willing to pay you to learn it. And it's like, I'm afraid I don't want to drop the ball on you guys. I really don't want to screw up and then waste time because I'm learning a brand new piece of software. They and then they call back like 2 hours later, and and Chad and I were sitting there talking about it. And it's like, yeah, I think it'd be a mistake to do this and screw them over. And they're like, we don't trust anybody else. We'll buy you 2 seats of Maya and we'll pay you. And it was something like 1.5 times your regular rate, but we need you to start tomorrow. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So, and but it was literally the first 2 days of sitting there in Maya is like, I can't get this thing to do what I want it to do. And I called up a buddy of mine who was a Maya guy. And
right.
He came, sat with me. He said, it's because you got a 2-button mouse. You'll never be able to use Maya with a 2-button mouse.
Exactly.
And I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, most of the stuff you do, you press down the middle mouse button. And I'm like, okay, let's go to Best Buy. So we hopped in the car, went to Best Buy, came back, and I said, "Show me what you mean." And then he starts showing me how to navigate the Maya interface. But it was just, so and Chad today is a Maya guy, and so
Yeah,
and that came out of that thing. Everything you do, if you stay in the business, or even if you don't, on some level, everything you do will somehow move forward and interact with the things that you do later. And my circle of friends, I can point almost all of them back to one guy that I knew.
yeah,
That somehow he introduced me to him, who introduced me to him, who introduced me to him, and the same thing with all the work. In almost every case, it's because, I mean, this stuff we're doing for a company called Buffalo 8, where we do all these action movies. We had done a film from a stuntman director friend of mine named Jesse Johnson.
Hmm.
I had met him through my producing partner, who was when he had an office on the Universal lot 20 years ago. And we had just stayed friendly, but I had, that producing partner I met because she was cast in one of my films, and you can just keep going down the line.
Absolutely.
And and she and I went on to do 7 movies, and she's now the head of development for Stars for TV. And so it's which the reason she's at Stars, because I brought her on to Film Roman, which was bought by IDT, which was sold to Stars. So everything, and that's a long-winded way of saying, try not to piss people off.
Relationships are important.
It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, and like you were saying, like I've known you since 1996. And that's really early in my career, and exactly what you said, and this is kind of a comment to all you guys on the call. I can trace everything that I'm doing today back to one guy that who got me a lot of my early work, and that's where I met Scott Coulter, right, which brought me to Shreveport, which everything that's associated with Shreveport is fruit of having known Scott, right, which is fruit of having known this other guy, and it's totally true. So for everybody on this call, like, your classmates are important to you. Have good relationships with people, because you never know which person on this call is going to actually be the first one to hit, like, to get the first jobs. Hey, there's a door open here, that sort of thing. So
now I have twin sons who are 34, and so one is a senior programmer, an engineer for Reddit, and he handles interface for Reddit. And his twin brother is a filmmaker, visual effects, animation guy. He's completely self-taught as a visual effects and animation guy, but he went to LA Film School. But personality-wise, he's not the guy who's going to network and call up an old classmate or stay in touch with those people. And you can see that, and I'm not speaking ill of him, because he's a very successful and great guy and incredibly talented, but he has not benefited from those relationships. His brother is very much the guy who stays in touch with all these different people and interacts and reaches out and so forth, and that's how he climbed to where he's at. He was and how his marriage came about, because he was at Westwood Academy studying programming. He created a gamers programming club, and then when he graduated, a young lady took it over. They got together a year later and kind of met and had lunch, and she was working at Disney, and she got him on at Disney, and then they started dating, and now they've got 2 kids, are married, and so she's the head of the app for Crunchyroll and Funimation for Sony. So it's an anime.
wow.
So she has teams all over the world that report to her, but together they had been at Fandango doing similar stuff. They had been at Disney Interactive doing stuff. They did Club Penguin. That was their big claim to fame 15 years ago. So
I missed that.
Yeah, say it again.
I miss playing that game. I used to play it all the time when I was a kid.
That's awesome. Yeah, we hear people say that, so that's cool.
And just like that, I feel old.
Imagine how
Same here. Can I ask a quick question?
Go, Trent.
What was your maybe what is one of your more favorite projects that you worked on? I'm curious.
Well, in terms of visual effects and things, we just finished a period piece about Boudica, who was a figure in early British history, 67 AD. So it
I
was
remember.
to do something about her because I love history, and it was it was bows and arrows and ballistas and stuff, and not all guns and gunplay. So it was totally different kind of action for us, and as well as matte paintings and extensions and stuff. So that recent one is and you'll probably find that hopefully that one of your more recent projects is always one of your favorites. But that's on my mind right now. But I mean, the fact that we were involved in iRobot was a lot of fun, and the fact that we did Miss Congeniality was a lot of fun because it was working for a man named John Van Vliet who owned Available Light, and John's very demanding, but once you show that you are doing your absolute best and can do good work, he lets you do it. And so the people that were there, Scott Coulter that Greg had mentioned, had been there just before I got there. Ajoy Mani and I were working together. Martin Hilke, these are all people that I've stayed friends with and worked with in some way to this day, and that's again 25 years ago or something. But I like those projects a lot. I'm writing a current story called Seventh Tiger, which deals with a group of 7 immortals in Indonesia that have been around for the last 1,000 years, and I'm very excited about that. We're trying to make that something that we could hopefully set up as a live action TV series for HBO. And it's very much not a comic book in the traditional sense of it's not light. It's a drama. It's very much along the lines of a little bit of Highlander in the fact that it's long-lived characters, but it's much more True Detective or something like that in terms of.
Okay.
So it's
that's a cool idea.
Yeah, so it's a neat thing, and I got to travel to Indonesia, and I got to explore Hindu temples and Buddhist temples and caves and all kinds of stuff, and spent
That's
6
really
weeks.
cool.
Yeah, it's very
You
cool.
did it as research? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, the company that's hired me wanted me to see these things because, again, that particular storyline has 1,000 years of history, and I'm doing flashbacks back and forth. And so I'm doing things like where you see a temple being built, and then you flash forward to the present day, and you see it in ruins or somewhere
Right.
from. And but the same characters are walking through the scene.
Oh, that's interesting.
They're still around. So it's lots of fun stuff with that, and I have them involved in key moments in Southeast Asian history. So things like when the cannon was first introduced to ward off Kublai Khan and so forth. So we have big battle sequences and so lots of fun. So that's something I'm really, really enjoying writing. I wrote a couple of pilots that Paramount has reacted really positively to, had a great reaction to the point where they asked if I'm willing to be in a writer's room, which was really good.
That's cool.
I am, but they kind of left it with, well, follow the trades and see if there's something that we announce that we're doing that would attract you. And it's like, that's cool. It'd be a lot easier if you just said, here, do you want to work on this?
Yeah.
But and I have the kind of the problems that we should have, which is I'm too busy.
Yeah.
So right now I'm writing a bunch of comics, and I'm trying to not do visual effects as much, but because I'm a senior compositor, when one of our artists sends something in that doesn't quite work, it's usually easier for me to just fix it.
Sit down and get it done. Right. Yeah.
And because our deadlines are really rushed. So.
Yeah. Most things that you got to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this case, we did 300 shots in 6 weeks on Boudica. Right now we're doing 74 shots in 2 weeks. And a week and a half into it, we were informed that tonally we're just not doing what the director wants. He wants, which just never happened. So this is just completely out of the blue. And that doesn't happen for us. We're usually you hire us because this is what we do. And
right.
In this case, it's your stuff looks Hollywood. It's like, so you have to tell me what you want specifically. And it's like literally things like, well, you've got like a blood hit coming out and we just want a red dot. It's like, well, I can turn off the blood hit, that's fine. It's just, it's not going to register in your film. And
it's not going to read right at all. So,
and that's what we're doing on 74 shots, is going back and making everything smaller. And then today I got a note saying, it's like, I think you were right, and we need to, it's like, okay.
You guys, this okay, what he's saying is so true. It's like, when you get down this road long enough, typically your intuition tells you how something should look. Like just, yeah, it needs this much, this here and there. And so often you go back to the V1. Don't you find that, Kevin?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So give you a quick example of that. I worked on a movie called I Am Number 4. It was a Disney movie. It came out. I think I worked on it just before I came down to Shreveport.
Mhm.
So it would have been Christmas of 2010 into 2011. And we did I did a bunch of shots really quickly, and then they wanted to keep me around, so they gave me stuff on Vampire Diaries. And again, when I say Christmas, it was literally the week between Christmas and New Year's, so
Right.
I was around again. And then I got a call from our friend Wes Kafer, who said, "Hey Kevin, are you busy? I'm in Shreveport." And that's what led me down there. But on I Am Number 4, we did a specific shot, and it was a young lady in sort of a superhero outfit, and she has a trail behind her, a motion blur, streaky blue and colorful trail, and she's flying up into the air, and she jumps onto a monster and then flips it and then exits frame. And it's really fast. It's like 27 frames with handles, so it's like an 18 shot or something like that. And but they went through dozens and dozens of iterations. And ILM was finishing it. They were doing the monster stuff. I guess I was finishing it. They had set up the monster. It was already in my plate. And but it was all about how she exits. Should she exit? Should she manage to turn herself upside down and exit out head first? Should she open her arms and go feet first? And again, it's 17 or 18 frames of actual shot. And so we did all this stuff. And then finally I got a note, and I'm sitting there with the owner. It's late at night, and he gets an email, and the director says, "I think all this stuff looks great, but I think I'd really like it to do this, 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 and this." And we're at that point, we're on version 68. And
my God.
yeah, I turned to Matt and I said, he's describing shot version 19. Are you sure? I mean, I know you're like that with numbers and stuff, but are you sure? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. I said, let's pull it up. He said, it's exactly what he's asking for. Make it 69 and send it back to him. And love it. This works perfectly. And that was it. So it was a little bit of the, send the bottle of wine back with a different label on it. But it was literally what he was asking for. It's just along the way he had gotten lost in the shuffle.
Forgot it. Yeah.
And it happens. I mean, you have to realize that, while it's easy for us to get frustrated with the directors and producers, we're dealing with one small portion of their project, and they're dealing with everything. They're dealing with distribution and investors who are ticked off, and it's taking too long. And the editor's wife had a baby, and now he can't come in and do the fixes, and it's all the other stuff.
Right.
At the same time. So you do have to have some patience with them. I mean, that doesn't mean I don't occasionally fire a client, but it's you have to try to understand that you're dealing with a small section of their film.
Yeah. Does anybody on the call have any questions for Kevin?
I have one question for me.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, hi, Kevin. Thank you for coming out for us.
Absolutely.
Name's Prince. I have a question about when you're adapting, say, for instance, like your material or anybody else's material, what's most important to you from a VFX perspective, or even just as a filmmaker in general?
When you say adapting it,
Yes.
so just to clarify, like, are you saying, is it like if I write a screenplay based on a novel or something like that?
Yes. Exactly.
I have done.
Mhm.
They for me, I guess it's trying to be true to the tone of the characters and the plot and story, and keep as much of what the work that they've done in it. I also wrote and drew the Rocky Horror Picture Show comic book that adapted the movie, and so that was very important to me to try
Wow.
to hit the tone of that. We did it for it was the 15th anniversary, so it was 1990, and I think that's so funny that was 15th. But there wasn't an official VHS out for it yet, and this is long before DVD. And so Fox, I think so it was, sent me a bootleg from a comic book convention of the movie, so I could have something to watch and a transcript of the script, because they didn't have an actual script. They just had a transcript like you'd use for subtitling. And but it was but for me, that's the tone, the characters, and being true to all that, I think, is really the biggest thing. And even the visual effects, we try to stay true to the tone and intention of the director and producer as best we can. That's what kind of threw us on this current project, because I thought we were, and in this case we weren't. He wants everything super understated, and a lot of what we're doing is stripping back stuff that we had. Just it's like that we. And as I say, he's now putting some of that back because he's watching it in context, which is what I wanted him to do, and realizing it happens so fast you don't see the blood hit at all. It happens so fast you don't see the muzzle flash or whatever it is, because he kept making us make them smaller and smaller. So.
And that's so often the case when you're doing that kind of work. It's like they'll sit and they'll watch the shot over and over and over and over on loop, and it's like, seriously, cut it in so you can actually see what's happening. And that happens a lot, where you get just pixeled to death on things, and then when they cut it in, it's like, oh yeah, it's not even there, didn't even see it.
No, that's the thing. It's this guy Jesse Johnson that we've now done 4 movies with him. He's the one we did Boudica with. Great guy, very talented, and really good filmmaker. But he has a tendency to want to say, not a lot of blood, not a lot of CG blood and stuff like that, and then you get it in context, and it's so frenetic because it's a big fight scene. So we're having people with swords and axes and bow and arrow stuff, that it's like, we took it out, but now you can't really tell that somebody got hit. And so we find putting it back in. Hang on one second. So Heather has a question. She wants to ask about the advice for getting in storyboarding. Well, basically, in the film industry, there's a union for storyboards, so it's a little difficult in that sense. Because you kind of have to prove yourself first, which is always a challenge with any kind of union. Is you have to show that you're a professional before you can work professionally in their field. But that said, independent films don't work with those unions. A lot of TV doesn't work with those unions, so you can get that kind of work. But what you would want to do is, again, build up a portfolio. So as a storyboarder, and the best way to do it probably, it's kind of the way I approached it when I was teaching myself about filmmaking, is take a script. Here's what I would recommend. Take a film that you love, that you like how it's told, see if you can find the script for it, which most scripts are available online. As a PDF, and then compare the two. So you can say, okay, so the script says that Indiana Jones is, hops off of his horse and leaps onto the back of the truck, and then reaches down underneath it, and he starts to slip back, and he catches his whip onto it and gets pulled along and manages to make his way up to the front of the truck. How many shots did they use to tell that story? Pay attention to how many times it's the same camera setup, but they were just now cutting it up in pieces editorially. And then, kind of do your own version of that. At the very least, do a shot list of that. And then, because the shot list basically represents the storyboard in words. So a true filmmaker shot list would just describe each setup, but still editorially, that's how I would cut it up. But I would do that, and then take a script for a movie that you haven't seen and try to storyboard a sequence. And it doesn't have to be a ton of drawings, but 20 or 30 drawings would be a good little chunk of something to be able to actually evaluate, and then get the movie and see how they handled that same scene. And hopefully it's a scene that they actually kept in the film. But but that's how I would approach it, is to do that stuff first, so that you've got a portfolio together. And then it's a matter of you can reach out to it's relatively easy to find the information on these storyboard unions and things. But there's a wonderful book out there, Goring, by a friend of mine named Trevor Goring, and he wrote a storyboard book, and he's one of the top storyboard guys in the film industry. And I think that looking at that would go a long way towards helping. Just like there's a great book on matte paintings out there by Craig Barron. It's more about traditional matte paintings that have been around forever, but it's still a wonderful thing if you can find it to check.
I think that's great advice. Actually, I wouldn't have thought of that, but that's actually really good advice. So, Heather, hopefully that works for you.
Yeah. Well, when I started teaching myself how to be a filmmaker, I studied. That's what I did. I studied films, and that sounds dumb, but I studied like Raiders of the Lost Ark. I sat down and said, I'm every shot, and I'm sitting there with a remote, and I'm going. It's like, okay, so I didn't even realize it, because I remember back then not consciously detecting cuts as commonly.
Yeah.
As today, I see every cut. It's just part of having done the stuff. I recognize when we go from a wide to a close up to whatever. And I remember the night after I got back from shooting my first short, that we watched Pulp Fiction on Laserdisc, and I'm watching the sequence where Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta end up firing on the guy in the chair, and the other guy comes out with his hand cannon, and they get shot at and they miss him completely.
Right.
That's it. But there's a shot where we get behind Jackson and Travolta, and I'm like, but they're only like 2 feet from the wall. That wall doesn't really exist. And it's like, oh, that's a wild wall. And then I realized that's a real set. And so that means that this wasn't really an apartment. And so it was all these revelations to me as I'm realizing the only way to get the camera there is because they're still in the same relative distance to everybody else, is that wall had to be yanked out. And it's that kind of thing that makes a big difference.
That is one of the things that I like. Any one of my students will tell you that I say this all the time. Anytime I go to a movie, guys, what do I say? Don't leave me hanging right here. Seriously.
Take notes.
My mic is muted. Analyze the movie.
Study.
Study it.
Studying. I've been like, I'm always going to study the movie. Because and sometimes the first time through, you'll watch it just for watching it, for enjoyment. But if you really want to learn something, you've got to sit down and like look at how they put it together. And
I remember 15, 20 years ago getting to go see Psycho at the ArcLight Hollywood, which was a really nice theater here. And I'd seen Psycho before, but that time I was actually, at this point, I was a filmmaker and just paying attention to camera setups and things. And I knew about the famous stuff, the shower scene, and how they did the vertigo shot on the stairwell and stuff like that, which is basically where you dolly in or dolly out and zoom in the opposite direction. It gives you this weird compression with a background versus forward. And it's called a dolly zoom a lot of times. I actually did it with a helicopter. And so we were in Israel shooting for a theme park movie, a religious theme park, and we were on top of a mountain. And hang on one second. There was an old fort, and there were a lot of tourists. And as we're approaching it, we decided we're going to zoom out. And so you get this really strange compression.
that's crazy.
We took 2 passes just in case it sucked, but it was really cool and it worked. And this was for an OmniMax style film here in San Diego. So you see that huge in the dome as it goes. It was a really neat thing. But yeah, and I remember watching The Shining and paying attention as if I'd seen it for the first time, even though I'd seen it half a dozen times, and realizing they've dropped out all ambient sound except for the dialogue in the interview with the manager when Jack Nicholson first gets the job. And well, that just makes everybody feel really uncomfortable and odd, and there's a reason for that. And so those kinds of things, So Taylor has a question. Let's say you have a project that you want to pitch. You have a story that you want to tell. How would you pitch it? How would you best pitch it? So like, I want to do one day, pitch an idea for an animated series. What would be the best way to pitch it? Well, for me, and I deal with this stuff, is the question is what do you want your role to be on the show? In other words, are you wanting to pitch a show that you're writing, or are you wanting to pitch a show that you're going to animate, or a show that you're just wanting somebody to make it? The latter is very hard to get anybody involved in. But if you're wanting to write something, you write a treatment for whatever the project is. So like I did and you can find these out there. Do a search on script Bibles or series Bibles, and you'll find like the series Bible for Stranger Things, or you'll find this, which is commonly out there, True Detective, and you'll be able to find like this script for the first episode. I'll respond to Kyle here in just a second. And so so mimic that format. Take a look at that format and say, okay, this is what has worked for other people. This is what they sold a show based on, and approach that. And but as far as animation goes, in a perfect world, my son's been dealing with this. Hang on a second. I apologize. In a perfect world, what you would do is you would go in with your pitch, maybe the script for the first 2 or 3 episodes, and then an animated, maybe 1 or 2 minute test. That's and character designs. So we're doing stuff with Changelings, this comic that we have a deal on the table, where I can show them the scripts for 7 issues, the drawings for 5 issues, the finished thing. 4 of them are already in print. And so there's a lot of material there. And the 7 issues is a self-contained story. So it's told in 7 issues of a comic book. And but we have character designs. We don't have any tests, but that was enough to get a company interested. In this case, just being candid, it helped the fact that the guy was a fan of Bloodshot. So it got me in the room. And he was like, he wanted to work with me. So that went a long way. And that's something, as I say, it's you try to always avoid burning bridges and things, and have a good reputation, because at the end of the day, your reputation is really all you have. And that's the challenge, as far as Kyle asked about someone who wants to be a comic book writer, again, I would get a hold of comic book scripts, read them, understand the format, kind of try to compare them to a finished book if you can, so you can see what the deal is. If I'm more than happy to send Greg a link to a bunch of my comic book scripts, and so you can see like Superman and Batman versus Vampires and Werewolves and Red Tornado and stuff like that. And those books are out there, and you can find them. They're not expensive. And but yeah, it's a challenging business to work in the comic book industry, because people, there's a high rate of turnover in terms of editorial staff, and it's a little Hollywood, miniature Hollywood, in the sense that you could be going down a road with an executive at Paramount, for the sake of argument, that likes your stuff and this is great and he's really going to champion it and we're going to go. And then you get an email from him 2 weeks later and say, yeah, I left, man, I got fed up, and so I'm now over at such and such, or I'm looking for a gig. Well, the next guy that comes in doesn't know who you are, doesn't care, and he's definitely not going to do anything that the last guy wanted to do. And that's common, unfortunately. And so I've hit that in comics, and I also, in my case, I've been around a while, so I deal with ageism in the sense of, well, we don't want stuff to feel old. It's like, well, just because I'm older doesn't mean I stopped appreciating current stuff. I mean,
Exactly.
there's some validity to the fact that some people tonally can only do stuff like what they did when they were in their 20s and 30s, but a professional who really does this stuff for a living should be able to adapt and pick up on new trends and things like that. I mean, it's Stan Lee was still writing good stuff up into his 60s with no problem, that was accessible and enjoyable and entertaining and so forth. Maybe not in his 80s, but in his 60s, it was great stuff. So.
How do you see the writer strike affecting things on a visual effects level, on the industry wide? And it's kind of a broad question, but it's not the first one we've been through. What do you see shaking out of the whole thing?
I think that there will, much like the current debt ceiling fight that they're having in Washington, I think that they will come to an agreement. I think it will not be what everybody wants, but I think that they'll come to some kind of a compromise. I do believe that there will at least be a forestalling of the AI stuff to benefit the writers. I may be wrong on that one, but that's my gut says that. I'm not in the guild. I made a choice when I was making a bunch of films back to back to try to make sure all the money went on the screen, and at my own sacrifice. So I chose to not join the guild. I wish I had, because we talk about things changing hands. The company I made the deal with, they were honorable people who would have properly shared profits and so forth.
Sure.
But they sold it to a company who was not. And so the only kind of guarantee I would have seen for residuals and so forth would have been from a guild.
Right.
And ironically, even though I'm not a member of the Writers Guild or the DGA, I get a small amount of residuals to this day for what they call foreign levies. So when a movie or TV show is sold in certain countries like Germany, specifically Germany has a tax that's on every kind of recordable media or device, and they take that tax and they put it into a pool, and then they have this massive database that says, okay, you had a film that was sold in Germany or aired on German television or what have you, and you're going to get this percentage based on this pool and how many of you guys there are. So I get a little residual on all my movies from that every year. And it started off, it was as high as a couple of grand, and then 20 years later, 15 years later, it's a few $100 a year. Usually comes around Christmas, which is nice. But it's not huge, but it's a welcome thing. So WGA, I don't think they're out of line with anything. I think the streamers hang on one second.
I think that's supposed to be Stan.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
The streamers, when they came onto the scene after the last writer's strike, they were in a position where they were able to say, hey, we're new media, we shouldn't have to pay the same kind of residuals, we don't know how any of this is going to play out.
Right.
And then they blew up and became enormous, and there's really big profits and really nice buildings with lots of glass and steel. And so I think it is fair for them now to step up and acknowledge and pay their fair share of that stuff.
No, it makes sense. How
So
long do you think that fight's going to last?
3 months.
3 months. Yeah. When the
last two have been 100 days and 105 days.
Okay, yeah, sounds about right.
So, yeah.
It's right about I think in my view, it's right about a quarter's worth of lost, downtime where they go, yeah, this is gonna really suck. We better figure this out, or it's gonna get
And
bad.
I could be wrong. It could go on for 6 months or something. I remember when I was a little boy, my dad was an auto worker in Detroit, and he went on strike for a year, and that was painful because he had just gotten into the union, and now we were. So for me as a little boy, and this is part of why I didn't join WGA, I just have to be candid about it, is I saw unions as the people who made my dad not be able to work and make a living for a year.
Right.
Not really understanding that they were fighting for his benefits and so forth. And the United Auto Workers also, they're not exactly not shady, but it was also about them making money.
Yeah.
But I do think the WGA is in the right on this one, and that's my belief in it.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, Netflix, Amazon, all of them have dramatically changed since since the last strike, or so. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It'll be. I think they're using it. I said this in my class a couple of days. I think they're using this strike right now, or a lot of the big ones, to act, to cut workforce and whatnot. I know there's a lot of, like, Disney is cutting a lot of people, and Paramount also, I believe, if I'm reading correctly.
Yeah,
it might be convenient timing. I'm not sure, but it seems like let's do that now. Well, we've got got a bit of a break. That seems at least to be my
No, it's definitely true, and I think even before the strike, there was a lot of downsizing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's the gist of that.
you mentioned script Bibles and series Bibles and stuff.
Mhm.
You can find a lot of that online. I found the series Bible for Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Yep.
I even found the pitch for Stranger Things,
There you go.
which apparently was not originally called Stranger Things.
The Montauk incident or something like that.
Montauk. That's what it says.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've studied a lot of those and kind of looked at them, because when I was putting my pitch Bibles together, when the pandemic hit, I was in a position where I was focusing a lot on writing a new pilot, creating a new TV series. I'd never done TV, and as far as as a writer, and I wrote a pilot, and I wrote a pitch Bible. And then I reached out to a director, showrunner I had worked with on Rizzoli and Isles. So again, that relationship thing. And I said, hey, I don't know how well you remember me, but we worked together on the show, and I always felt we had a good relationship and enjoyed working with you and so forth, and was particularly happy that towards the end, it felt like we were finishing each other's sentences when we were describing shots and stuff. And so anyway, I've written this thing. Would you be willing to read it? And so in that kind of an inquiry, by the way, I'm going to say something that may seem obvious to some of you and may not to others. You don't send the thing that you're wanting them to read in that inquiry. It's a request. Are they willing to read it?
Exactly.
Because if you just send it, some people take the attitude of, it's like, well, I'm a writer myself, and now I'm exposed to liability. If somehow I'm already working on something that's very similar, you might sue me. I don't, all that kind of stuff. So he said, yeah, I'd love to read it. And then he got back to me and said, love it, give me like 3 days. And I'm like, okay, 3 days to do what? Because I'm just curious what he was thinking, because I was thinking he was just going to give me notes, but the gist of it was, I want to be involved. I'd like to develop this with you if you're open to it, and I'd like to be the showrunner on this. It's good. And he was, unfortunately, he was on a show as the showrunner that tanked, and it was Cowboy Bebop, and and that really hurt him that next year or two, and so he ended up pulling out of my project, and he's off in Romania doing some other movies. They're valid, real shows.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, but we went back and forth, and he brought a lot to the table, and his managers loved it, and his agents loved it a lot. He tried to get the people who were behind Cowboy Bebop involved. They sat on it for 6 months before they eventually said, no, it's too similar to something we were wanting to do.
Yeah.
Which was but they loved the writing, and they introduced me to somebody else, and then he also brought in a lady who was producer on the show, but she'd just done Snowpiercer and some other movies, and she liked it, but she's partners with two guys, and one of the two guys said, we shouldn't be doing anything that doesn't already exist as another IP in another medium. So he only wanted to do adaptations of novels, graphic novels, comics, that kind of thing. And that just, that's not what this was. I could do that, but give me a year to get it published.
Right.
But yeah, that was the gist of that. I have no idea why I started to tell you that story, but anyway, because I was looking at script Bibles and studying the format.
Right.
That's what I used, and then I had my manager send me I said, send me if you can, send me a script and a script Bible for something that you successfully placed. I don't want to see the ones that failed. I want to see what worked.
Right.
And then I based some of my stuff off of that, and there are all kinds of different formats. The Stranger Things one that was mentioned a minute ago is there's a lot of, I don't know if he's looking at the same one I did, but it has a lot of graphic design in it. It's not just text. It's actually a package, and that helped. I did the same thing with mine, since mine dealt with a a savant who sees serial killer murder scenes. I illustrated it with her drawings, and that I think helped as well. So.
That's awesome. So let's just take a couple more questions. I want to be respectful of your time because I know you've been with us for an hour plus. So does anybody else have a question or two for Kevin?
I do. How
Good.
would how do you feel about like the AI situation with like helping out with all this? Really?
Well, there's that's a big umbrella. So
Yeah.
there's the large language model stuff like ChatGPT, and then there's the art generation or photo generation stuff like Midjourney. But there's also stuff like Runway ML stuff where you can use tools that work themselves into things like Rotobrush and After Effects, where it's using some artificial intelligence to help you do rotoscoping or to do speed changes and all that kind of stuff. I'm open to all of the above. I think partially because I'm a computer geek, so it doesn't tend to be all that frightening to me. I recognize that the concern that people have with it taking people's livelihoods, I understand that completely. I also don't think that you're ever going to put the genie back in the bottle. So that's just, it is what it is. But I use ChatGPT we used it once in our comic book because I did a story that had a flashback to 70,000 years ago when a volcano blew in Indonesia, and which has really happened, and it plunged the earth into 40,000 years of nuclear winter. And in our story, chaos and good are essentially battled from time to time, and that time good lost. And we were a page short because I'd written a 23-page script instead of 24 before we'd ever set our standards. And I said, why don't we write a page about the real story and show illustrations of that current place, this Lake Toba. It was Mount Toba back then. It's referred to Mount Toba in the past. And I said, I could write it, but all I'm going to do is summarize what I'm seeing in Wikipedia and other websites. Wonder how well ChatGPT would do with that. And so I basically said, write me a one-page article about the history of Lake Toba and the explosion 70,000 years ago and how it impacted life on Earth. And it wrote this wonderful piece, and we found some photographs that worked with it, and that's in the book. So good or bad, that's how we approached it. On a John Travolta movie we just did called Cash Out, there's a bank heist, and the producers, there's no other way to say it, they were being lazy, and they didn't shoot the outside of a building that we needed to blow up. And I said, it shouldn't fall on me, a visual effects guy, to go shoot a building for you or get the clearance and find the stock photo and get it approved and all that stuff. And I really kept putting it back in the producers, the clients' corner. And they just didn't do it. And it's like, we have to deliver your film in like 3 days. And I literally woke up thinking, I wonder if I described the outside of a bank to Midjourney, what kind of an image I would get. And I said, bank building, lots of glass and steel. We see the sidewalk, we see cars parked out on the sides. The photographically real, granite facade on part of the walls, and shot with a Canon 5D Mark II with a 50mm lens. And I got like 4 images initially, and then I did another 4. Took one of them, I tweaked it a little bit in Photoshop, and I sent it over and said, we have complete clearance on this because I generated it. Do you want to use it? And he said, can we flip it left and right? And I'm like, sure. And because he knew something I didn't know, it was actually used twice in the film, and they had another shot where we wanted to see it from another angle. And I said, sure, it's pretty neutral, so I mean, it's not gonna. There wasn't anything that made it very clearly this thing is on the right side, or there's no text, so you could flip it without any problems. And then I did all the visual effects stuff of adding all the smoke and fire and glass breaking and stuff to have this wall blowout, which I would have done if we had a still or a plate to shoot.
Right.
And that's so I have used the stuff professionally. And we also had a shot on Boudica where they had a stock footage. This was a total cheat, but they had stock footage of an aerial shot of a primitive looking farm that you could buy existed in 2,000 years ago, and but it didn't have any animals in it, and so I started playing with Midjourney and said, aerial shot straight down on a field of green, we see sheep and cattle and hogs and things, and it took me maybe 7 or 8 iterations, and then thinking through in terms of straight down, because I needed it. It kept wanting to give me stuff that's more 3/4, and it's like, yeah, the perspective's not going to hit.
Right.
But I finally got things, and because I told it on a field of green, we were able to keep the green and then take the animals and put them in, and it worked.
That's smart.
Yeah.
And
it's because it's like, and I did one other thing, and they don't hold up under scrutiny in the sense of the animals are fine, but I also did like a little wagon and a man and a horse or a donkey, and that looks a little CG. It looks like a little generated, but it's also, in all honesty, the stock footage was only 1920 by 1080, and I think we were maybe that little wagon is maybe 40 pixels across or something.
right.
So it's fine. I got to see it at Photochem projected on a 20-foot screen, and you wouldn't think twice about it because it's not the point of the shot.
Right.
And that's another thing I should just say from a visual effects standpoint. In a sense, we're magicians. That there is misdirection. There's, look at this over here. My track's not working really good. Can I do some camera shake? Can I do a flash? Is there something I can do to help distract so that you're not really paying attention to this thing over here?
I'll take one other question, and then Kevin will
Already.
Anyone?
All good. What did Shakira mean when she said what?
Oh, I had an audible gasp when you said cowboy bebop fail.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought it was. So, yeah, I know a lot of people involved in that. They shot in New Zealand, and I knew the lead actor. He was very good friends with an actor we had on Rizzoli Niles, and so I've been around him.
Please tell them from me personally that they amaze me every day.
Oh, that's good.
I adore them.
I will pass that along. That's awesome.
Yes.
Are many of you into anime or animated shows today?
Yeah, totally.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Very much, yeah.
Dear God,
Do like a
Kevin,
TED
just
talk?
open.
I can do a TED talk right now.
Well, what
am.
And name a couple of shows you'd recommend.
One Piece.
Yeah.
What genre do you want? To be precise.
Sword
I heard
Art
a lot of good things
Online.
about Odd Taxi. I need to look into that, but I hear it's really good.
Taxi, One Piece.
I like Invader Zim.
Yeah.
Invader Zim is very special.
Attack on Titan is like, I love it so much. It's like disturbingly beautiful.
Which one is that? I'm sorry.
Attack on Titan.
Attack on Titan, sure.
If you like
Demon
Attack on
Slayer.
Titan, you should do Villain Age. That's dark and good.
Yeah.
JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. Oh man.
A lot of
Again.
We got a lot of fellas
And-
here. that
and
love
do
them.
any of you-
Trigun.
Do you want a specific genre? I got a list with
Berserk.
reviews.
Any of the
I was just
Tenchi
curious.
ones, Tenchi Muyo Universe in Tokyo.
Yeah.
We'll talk
No,
about
I was
90s
just curious because as we're dealing with this adaptation of my comic series called Changelings, there's some questions in terms of tone of things and style. Awesome. Thanks for this wonderful list. And
Got a big list for you, friend.
awesome.
There it goes. Wow, look at chat.
If you want Whimsical, go Kipo's on Netflix.
What is it?
And if you want Whimsical and post-apocalyptic, go Kipo and the Age of the Wonder Beast. Is on Netflix. Got 2 seasons. It's really good. And the animated direction is on it. It's great too.
Very cool. Awesome. And do any of you read manga as well, or just the anime stuff?
Yes.
Hi. Again.
I like reading
Got a
manga.
list.
I got the Fire Force manga and one of the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess manga.
Mhm. Very cool. No, it's interesting because as a comic book guy, I go into a Barnes and Noble, if they still exist anywhere, and see that
They
yeah, it's just unfortunately a lot of ours can shut down. The Books A Million still out there, which I think there was one in Bossier City when I was there, but and I miss
It's a million closed a few years ago.
Did they?
It got replaced with like a it's not even a hobby store. It has books, records, movies,
Interesting.
stuff like that in the back.
But yeah, you go into a bookstore chain, and I'm amazed that there might be, 3 long shelves of manga stuff, and which is just, that's cool. It's great to see. I mean, I remember being exposed to it, 38 years ago, something like that, the first time, and looking at it and looking at Shonen Jump and different things, or watching anime like back then. And the movies would have been things like Vampire Hunter D and Akira and stuff like that, or Supernatural Beastie City. So, but it's just it's fascinating to see how much more entrenched that is in U.S. cultures. Well, a pleasure to talk to all of you.
Kevin, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that we
Appreciate
had the chance to
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank
you.
Awesome. Well, everybody take care. Have a wonderful
Thank
rest
you.
of your day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. We'll
Bye.
talk soon.
Bye.
All right. Okay. I'll talk to you later.
Touch.
There you go. Kevin VanHook, guys.
Man, he's a great guest. Thank you for that. Great.
Absolutely.
He's literally doing everything I want to do.
Well,
Thanks, Greg.
yeah, my pleasure. And like I said, I met Kevin back in 1996, and when I came out to Shreveport, he came out to work on a different movie, but with the same company. And so we've crossed paths several times in our careers. And as he mentioned too, he and Bill Arance worked together too. He worked for like Bill worked for Kevin at Film Roman actually. Yeah, it's just great. I mean, to see, excuse me, how far someone's come in their career. I mean, he was nowhere nearly as accomplished then when I first knew him. And Rahima, to kind of to take your point there, it takes years to get to a point where people trust you and people know your work and are comfortable with it, and and so it's one of those things, like all the things that he said about maintaining relationships, and and when I brought up the whole concept of saying yes to a request that somebody had within reason, obviously, those are the kind of things that open doors to be able to do the larger type work, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.